For literally centuries, the world map was shaped by these huge, powerful Muslim empires. But, as we roll into the 19th century, that map starts to look, well, a little shaky. We're about to dive into how these giants began to stumble and how that created this massive power vacuum that European nations were just waiting to jump into, completely reshaping the globe in ways we are absolutely still feeling today. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at an empire that's starting to crack from the inside. Then we get into this high-stakes competition, they called it the Great Game, for its lands. After that, we'll see the desperate scramble to modernize, then the tragic, kind of ironic way that all backfired. And finally, we'll connect the dots to see why this history still matters so much right now. All right, let's kick things off with the Ottoman Empire. For over 600 years, this empire was an absolute titan. It was a powerhouse, stretching all the way from Europe to Egypt. But by the 1800s, this giant was on shaky ground, and you better believe the rest of the world was paying close attention. So that's the big question, right? How does an empire that basically defined an era for centuries suddenly get the nickname the sick man of Europe? The answer isn't simple, like one lost battle or a single bad leader. Nope. It was more like a slow sickness, something rotting away from the inside out. And this really lays out the perfect storm that was brewing. You've got all this internal decay. The leadership is fighting, corruption is everywhere, and the money is a total mess. They're also falling behind on technology, which used to be their strong suit. And then, on top of all that, you have this new, powerful idea catching fire: nationalism. People in places like Greece and Serbia started saying, hey, we want our own countries, and began to chip away at the very edges of the empire. And, that kind of weakness, it's like blood in the water. As the Ottoman Empire started to wobble, the big European powers didn't just see a problem, they saw a massive opportunity. The entire region was about to turn into a giant chessboard for a very, very dangerous game. And the engine driving all of this is a key concept: geopolitics. You gotta understand this to get what happens next. It's not just about planting a flag for glory. It's about strategy. It's about grabbing land because it controls a shipping lane, or because it has oil, or maybe just because it keeps your enemies away from your own borders. This whole rivalry for Central Asia got this famous nickname, the Great Game, and it was a total clash of titans. On one side, you have Russia, the Russian bear, pushing south. They were desperate for a warm water port and were eyeing lands all the way toward India. On the other side, the British lion, absolutely determined to protect its most valuable possession, its colony in India, by stopping Russia at all costs. And the sources really show us how high the stakes were. The lands of the Ottomans, Persia and Afghanistan, they became the main battleground for this huge imperial chess match. Every political move, every treaty was just a play by either Russia or Britain, and the people who actually lived there were caught right in the middle. Eventually, this kind of Cold War of influence got hot. In the Crimean War, you have this totally strange alliance where Britain and France actually fought with the Ottomans to stop the Russians. But here's the really telling part: even though they won, the Ottomans still ended up losing more land. They just weren't calling the shots anymore. So what do? What do you do when your empire is crumbling from within and you've got predators at the door? Well, leaders in the region realized the old ways aren't going to cut it. Their only shot at survival was to, fight fire with fire. They had to modernize, and they had to do it fast. Let's take Egypt as an example. Its leader, Muhammad Ali, totally saw the writing on the wall. He broke away from the Ottomans and launched this radical plan. First step, build a modern army, just like the Europeans. Second step, totally overhaul the economy, because he knew that a strong economy was the only way to stay independent. Meanwhile, Persia was in an even tougher spot. They were literally being squeezed between the Russian and British empires, losing territory to both sides. So, just like Egypt, they saw modernization as their only possible escape route. And this is where the story takes a really tragic turn, because the very medicine these nations took to save themselves, these huge, ambitious projects, it turned out to be the poison that would ultimately seal their fate. This pretty much sums it up perfectly. In Egypt, they built the amazing Suez Canal, a huge symbol of their modern future. But the project buried them in so much debt that they had to sell control of the canal and eventually their whole country's finances to the British. Then you have Persia. They discover oil. Sounds great, right? But when they gave a business deal to a British company, people revolted. And that gave Russia and Britain the perfect excuse to send in troops to keep the peace and, surprise, take control. So, here's the big takeaway. This final takeover wasn't always won with armies and cannons. It was a new kind of conquest, economic imperialism. European banks would give out these massive loans for modernization. When the debts got too big to pay back, which they always did, the banks would just seize the assets, the canals, the oil fields. They took it all. And that's how they carved up the world into these spheres of influence. And look, this isn't just dry history. The borders that were drawn back then, the economic systems they put in place, the resentment, all of it casts this long shadow that stretches right into our world today. This quote from the source material just says it all, doesn't it? These efforts came too late to prevent Europeans from taking over. There was a real desperate attempt to catch up, but the wave of European power, both economic and military, was just too strong. Which leaves us with one last really crucial question to think about. When we look at the news today, at the conflicts in the Middle East and Central Asia, how much of that is just the great game being played all over again? How are the ghosts of these old empires and the lines they scribbled on a map a century ago still pulling the strings in our modern world?